if we are tracing Presbyterian roots back, we go all the way back to the start of the Protestant Reformation, and John Calvin specifically. So we're talking 1500s, right, in Geneva, Switzerland, which just before Martin Luther, right, or just after Martin Luther and Zwingli, who are contemporaries, same with John Knox, who we'll talk about in just a minute. But Calvin is kind of where we get a lot of our Reformed thinking, right? This emphasis on grace from God, right, through Jesus. And then this, he coined the term, right, presbyters, which is just a fancy, or it's the same translation as like elders in Greek. So that's where we get presbyter, elder. But this idea of representative government, for lack of a better way to explain it, in Presbyterianism is from John Calvin. So we see some of, if you're looking at just his part there, right, that if you're in the Book of Confessions, which is a preview here for what we'll talk about in just a minute, this book right here, both it and the Book of Order are available online as PDFs if you just have a lot of time and you like to read online, or you can get hard copies. But this contains, the Book of Confessions basically contains all the statements of faith the Presbyterian Church believes in. And one of those happens to be contributed to by John Calvin, which is the Heidelberg Catechism, which kind of same time, 16th century Germany. So one of John Calvin's contemporaries that travels with him or spends some time in Switzerland and then goes back to Scotland is John Knox. And John Knox is the leader of the Scottish Reformation. He kind of travels between Geneva and Edinburgh and learns under John Calvin, takes that kind of back to Scotland and brings the movement there. And that's kind of where Presbyterianism really takes root and where kind of our American history that we'll get into in a second comes from. So Calvin and Knox are similar but slightly different, right? There's Knox emphasizes more the authority of Scripture, like that the Bible is kind of the first and like the last thing that you read, right? That there are certainly other things, and obviously the Book of Confessions being one of them, but that kind of Scripture has this authority. He also is a big education reformer. He wants there to be schools in every parish at the time, right, run by the church. So there's this kind of element of education. Also, if you're interested in his history, really rails against the monarchy, and especially Mary, Queen of Scots at the time. If you're into that type of history, you can spend some time reading what John Knox has to say, which is not too kind to. And then the other thing that Knox, that we see kind of this idea traced for, is he advocates for the separation of church and state, at least when it comes to political power. And we can certainly imagine how that influences Presbyterianism in America moving forward. It's not quite to the degree that we would describe separation of church and state, but this idea that like the head of state, like the king or the queen, should not also be the head of the church is what Knox argues for. So then we move into American Presbyterians, which there is, in the early 1700s, this big migration or immigration of Scottish and Irish folks coming over, who are the main folks who make up the Presbyterian Church at that time. And in 1706, they established the Presbytery of Philadelphia. And there kind of becomes conflict pretty much right away at that point, even pre-Revolutionary War, that there's this First Great Awakening, which there are a lot of, there's a lot of energy in the church. There's a lot of call for reform and movement, mostly around like how ministers, how much energy they should have, how they should preach the word, and then if they can cross into other presbyteries and kind of preach outside their limits. So there's kind of this divide that comes, that's old school and new school. You can kind of think of it just as old school is like keep things the way they were, new school reform, right? And we'll continue to kind of see this, we'll trace these threads kind of through the history of American Presbyterianism, that this kind of conflict between keep things the same, reform, is common, and I would say not just unique to Presbyterian history. So moving into the Revolutionary War, Presbyterians are dramatically in support of it. There's a few quotes here, right, that British loyalists and newspapers coined the American Revolution the Presbyterian Revolt, or there's a quote from King George here, "Are they not Presbyterian?" In reference to those who are seeking independence for the colonies. So we can see that influence from John Knox, right? That separation of church and state, the disrespect of the monarchy, find its roots right here in America. So this split between the old school and new school lingers for not too long. That both sides end up supporting the American Revolution and come back together in 1789. And then we once again have one Presbyterian church in America for a little bit, which, as we move on to the Civil War, we see another split occur within the denomination between both in the South, between the new school in the South and the new school and the old school in the South. Both, majority of the South supports slavery, but there's also, there's some who don't and some who do, and kind of same in the North, just reversed, where Northern Presbyterians are mostly in favor of abolishing slavery, but not all. So both there's two geographic splits on both sides. So we have, new school Presbyterians in the North and new school Presbyterians in the South, and same for old school. So we still see this split of now we have four, basically, folks. After the Civil War, the two branches come back together, but not North and South. So we now have the two old school branches in the South come back together to form the Presbyterian Church in the USA, which is PCUS. And we'll get into a lot of different abbreviations here, which if you've been around us long enough, you can see that we're familiar with all these abbreviations. And hopefully it gets a little simpler as we go. So we now have the PCUS in the South, and then the Northern Presbyterians come back to form the United Presbyterian Church in the United States of America, the UPC USA, is what comes back together post-Civil War. So we stay that way for over 100 years until the 1950s, which at that point, the next kind of touch point is women in the Northern Presbyterian Church, the UPC USA, are eligible for ordination in 1956. And that kicks off some disagreement both within that church and the Southern counterparts who see that happening and have some feelings about that. So that's kind of the one touch point. The other touch point you see there is the Confession of 1967, which you can find in your Book of Confessions or online on the viewable PDF. But the Book of Confessions is this joint statement with Episcopals, United Methodists, and the United Church of Christ. That's pretty short, but their charge was basically to come together to create a new confession of faith, because there hadn't been one for a long time for Presbyterians. And what they came up with is basically this three-part call of how the church lives out its mission in the world. And it basically centered around this call for social justice and social action, that the church has a mission in the world that God has given, and that to live out that mission faithfully requires action, basically. So I think we can imagine how some of the things that we do here at St. Andrew kind of fit into that worldview. So those kind of two touch points are what, once again, cause church division or reunification. So in the South, the PCUS, the Presbyterian Church in the United States, hears that there's these rumblings and this talking between merging with the Northern Presbyterians. So some of the Southern Presbyterians basically get ahead of that. They say, no, we don't want to merge. So they break off and form what we now know as the PCA, the Presbyterian Church in America, which exists today. I think the only one in town is downtown. One Ancient Hope, yep. So they're still around. So with that split that occurs, and there's some folks that break off from the Northern Presbyterians as well, who also don't feel great about ordaining women or social justice, but it's a smaller group. So we're kind of all those folks leaving both North and South. We finally in 1983 see the UPC USA and the PCUS merge back together to form the PCUSA. So that's where we get back to where we are today with there's more than one Presbyterian denomination in the United States, but we can kind of trace that all the way back to pre-Revolutionary War, that there now is kind of this one mainline denomination. And I looked at the numbers the other day while I was looking at this, and the PCUSA is the largest by far of Presbyterian churches in America. And the thing about church history, right, is, even back to pre-Protestant Reformation, there were always divisions, disagreements, folks who were splintering off, in the church. So this is nothing new. We're part of a proud tradition, I don't know, of disagreement. Okay, so kind of the next thing to talk about are the two big books, which I've already kind of talked about. So there's the Book of Confessions. This one doesn't change too much, or it has not changed since, let's see, when was the Barman? It hasn't changed in a while. Longer, it has not changed since I've been alive. There we go. Let's go with that one. It's available online as a PDF, but what this contains is basically just all the statements of faith that the Presbyterian Church affirms, from something as early as the Apostles' Creed to, for example, the Confession of 1967. So if you're just like, man, what does the church agree with, like, as far as church history goes, here's a resource for that. It is rather long, but just that's a good kind of go-to. You can also just, if you're like, man, what does the PCUSA have to say about inclusion, for example? The denomination's website is a good resource for that they will contain. They have a good fact and questions, or FAQs, for stuff like that. That'll just kind of give you a quick overview of, if you're like, oh, I just wanted to look up that one thing and know about that. That's a really good resource. The other book that does change, and I have an older copy just for fun, is the Book of Order. This one is 2015 to 2017. So wow, so ancient history. Yeah. I think it usually kind of gets updated every 3 years. Yeah, which is how often the General Assembly meets. Or no, they meet every 2 years. Just kidding. So that on an off cycle. But anyways, the Book of Order is basically like, how do Presbyterian churches run themselves and interact with the higher levels of Presbyterian structure? And it basically, it's also, both these documents are searchable too. So if you're like, man, if you just typed in, you're looking at the Book of Order and you're like, what's an elder do? You could type in elders into the search and it'll give you everything where it says elder, and you can just like click through and be like, oh, okay, that's what it says about elders.
And we use that feature sometimes at session when people want a specific wording. Yes. And so really quick search it, Book of Order, because it's long.
Yeah, which is a great example of the fact that you are not required to memorize either of these documents to be a Presbyterian. They are just resources that exist and things that kind of help us stay in good order, as the term goes. So there are kind of two main roles of leadership. There was one more thing I wanted to say about being a Presbyterian. So most PCUSA churches, not all, follow the order of worship in the liturgical calendar. So if you're looking at a bulletin, for example, from today, you would see that there is kind of this structure to worship. It's not that you have to have 4 songs and two readings or anything like that, but it's more of a structure, that there is a call to confession, there is a message, right? That if you walk into any PCUSA church in America, you would encounter a similar order of worship, and potentially liturgical calendar, which is just a fancy way of saying, if you are on the denomination's website, there are readings given for any given week in this calendar year. So if you walked into a different church, you might hear the same psalm that Pastor Carl preached about this morning read in that church and talked about. So there are kind of these connections there. Yeah, Troy.
And is that the liturgical calendar that other denominations, so like Catholicism and everyone else follows too?
Yeah, the calendar itself, not necessarily the readings, if that makes sense. Like there's Lent, Advent, ordinary time, like that would be comparable to Catholicism, but the readings might not be the same. You might see different, readings week to week. Okay, so there are kind of two main leadership roles in our denomination, which are elders and deacons. And kind of the quickest way you can think about it are elders are kind of focused on leadership and deacons are focused on service, which is, it's more nuanced than that, but that's the easiest way to break it down. So elders sit on session, which you can think of kind of like, if we're now putting on our business hats, as kind of like a governing board for the church. So elders basically sit around at their meetings and discuss things that have been presented from either committees or teams, which is kind of made up of other folks in the congregation who have been tasked with focus on a certain area. So, for example, like Austin and I both sit on the worship team, which we meet once a month, and there's some other folks in the congregation who are part of it. There's an elder, Virginia Ibrahim Olin, who's a part of it, and we sit around and we talk about how can we make worship meaningful to folks, and we come up with ideas, and then we make recommendations to session, and session's like, wow, that's a great idea, or maybe workshop that one a little more, and they send it back to us. But that's kind of the general structure of how things get done on a month-to-month basis, is that ideas kind of flow from these teams and committees into session. Session gives feedback or approval, and then those things happen. The other kind of role is deacons, and deacons have their own team. They also report to session, but they kind of focus on service. So the last couple of years here at St. Andrew, right, the deacons have kind of picked a focus. 2 years ago it was mental health. 3 years before that, I think, was food insecurity, which has really, taken root or hold here. We see that in a lot of the ministries that occur. Is there a focus this year yet?
No, they asked us not to because all the volunteers are spread within doing the food insecurity and mental health adjusting type things.
Yeah. But yeah, the deacons basically coordinate like all the service efforts of the church. Like when we do, collection for the schools or like winter clothing drives, things like that is kind of what the deacons will at least spearhead. Certainly they might pull in someone like, Children and Family Ministries or myself, ask for help. Hey, can you help pack stuff or load it? But that's kind of led by the deacons. They also do like visits with folks, go pray with people, or there are shut-ins in the community. The deacons are kind of the first group to reach out to folks in need. Coming up soon, which I think I can share, Jeff, about the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Cool. The deacons are kind of another thing. The deacons that are kind of bringing back is they've divided Iowa City up into neighborhoods, kind of geographically. So Jeff and I are on East Side number 2. I don't know. They're numbered. But there's kind of a deacon. Whoever lives in that neighborhood is kind of responsible for that neighborhood, for doing like outreach. Like if somebody has, a new baby and like, hey, like, can we get a meal train going for them? The deacon's the best person to either coordinate that or talk to about that, or kind of host events in that neighborhood. So that's kind of generally what deacons do. So
deacons don't aren't on session.
Correct. Deacons are not on session.
And who gets to be on session?
Great question, Kathy. Yeah. Let me get into how that works. Yes. So, if we are looking, that is my next bullet point. If you're looking, so any member can serve as an elder or deacon if elected. So if you are a member of St. Andrew, if you've joined the church, you can be nominated, self-nominated, or approached to serve as an elder or deacon. I would say, there's about 15 to 20 people on session. 16. There you go. 15 to 20 feels good.
It used to be more. We don't do more.
Okay. Yeah, and then maybe it's kind of the same number of deacons, 10-ish, 10 to 12, 15. Okay. So also 16. Okay. So anybody can fill that role. If you're interested in being an elder or deacon, it's pretty much as simple as approaching the personnel team and saying, "Hey, nominating team. Sorry, wrong team. I got you. Yeah, I'm there. No, thanks for the correction. No, I deal with the personnel team. Nominating team is, anyways. If you're interested in that, I would talk to those folks, but anybody can do it. It's just more of a question of, do we need more folks? But there's some recent new members who joined within the last year or two, like Scott Fisher, who is now an elder, and I think he joined since I came here. So, it's not like you have to be here for 5 years before you can be an elder or a deacon. One of the things that probably exists somewhere, I couldn't direct you to where it is on our website, but I'm sure there's a list somewhere of all the teams that exist at St. Andrew, and it's on the information kiosk. Excellent. But if you want to serve on a team or as an elder or deacon, but there is no requirement to be an elder or deacon to serve on a team. So if you're like, I'm just really interested in music, you can see like, oh, who do I need to talk to serve on the music team? And most teams, I don't think you'd get turned away. I haven't encountered that. That we are always looking for folks to. I was going to say this at the end, but I'll just say it now. I was reading a book for seminary for pastoral leadership this weekend, and one of the things it didn't say it this way, but this is how it stuck in my head. At Olive Garden, when you're here, your family. Everybody knows what I'm talking about? Yeah. One of the things it cautioned against was that's a bad attitude to have for churches. That churches shouldn't, and I know I see some questioning faces here, but this is the exact place for it. That if a church's goal is to be a family, it's hard for new people to feel like they're part of that family, right? That guests or new members or folks who are visiting should not feel like, oh, you're just a guest, you're just visiting with us, right? And the story that it illustrated this was like somebody who'd been coming for years who was still described like, oh, like it's so great you're here with us this week, or like we're glad you're like visiting. And it's like, dude, I've been here for years, right? Like that. So the goal is, if you want to serve on a team, great, join in, hop in, participate. That the best way to get involved at St. Andrew is either somebody approaches you and asks you, but like truly, if there's an interest area that you have, they'll probably take you. Like I would say, I can't think of an example that I've heard of somebody saying, oh no, like we have enough people on that team, we don't need your help. Yeah. So yeah, if you find something you're interested in and you need to know, and if you're like, I don't even know who to talk to, send me an email, I'll figure it out for you. We'll track it down, we'll get you involved. But yeah, as we talked about, tracing our roots back to John Calvin here, we have our representative government. So can people see this? It's kind of small. I just realized. Okay. The bottom level here is our congregations. Oh, and then you see the church here, but we kind of already talked about that, right? The elders run the church. So congregations nominate elders to session, and then these are just elders here. And they all serve kind of the same level. Elders and deacons get elected for 3-year terms. You can serve 2 consecutive 3-year terms, and then you have to rotate off. So you can serve as an elder or deacon for 6 straight years. Once you've become an elder or deacon, that position is actually for life, unless I guess you pronounce it or leave the denomination. But so if you see a baptism up front, for example, right, and there's depending on how much attention you pay at baptisms, right? There's usually an elder that presents the family and the child to be baptized. That could be a current elder or a previous elder, right? So that position of elder or deacon is something that sticks with you.
Same thing for communion too.
Yep.
Serving.
Yep, same thing for serving communion, yes. So anyways, that's a sidetrack. But so these sessions and local congregations, the next kind of tier up is presbytery. And presbytery is, we are part of the synod. I don't know why they use two different words, but or the presbytery of East Iowa. Oh yeah, synod, yeah. Sorry. No, there's another level here that's synod. But anyways, presbytery is kind of regionally grouped churches who are still part of the PCUSA. We have, like for example, committees at the presbytery level, which we report to. If you're following closely the board game on the screen there of calling our next pastor, one of those committees is the Committee on Ministry and Vitality, which we sent our transfer portal request for a new pastor off to, and they'll read that and give their feedback, and then they'll send it back to session and say, yeah, or make some edits, and then send it back to us. So just like our committees report to session, we do the same thing up to presbytery. I would say there's maybe a little less oversight or micromanaging, hopefully, at that level, but it can occur. And then presbyteries report up to synod, which is not here, but it's in between. And then finally, at the very top is General Assembly, which meets every 2 years. And we nominate folks from our presbytery, to go off and represent us at General Assembly. And at General Assembly is basically where we get things like the Confession of 1967 or changes to the Book of Order. Like that's where those things are discussed, debated, and then like voted on at that level. So when the Book of Order changes, it's because General Assembly voted on it. And they send that and filter that all back down to us. Because it's representative and because there are all these committees and teams, everybody gets a voice. Everybody gets to participate, give feedback, right? Like just like today when we had a congregational vote, like people could have voted no on Emmett. That'd be kind of strange, but like they could, right? That like if you're like, man, that guy Emmett, I don't think he'd make a good youth deacon. You could say no, I don't vote. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I'm talking directly to Emmett now. He's a good example because I don't know why you'd vote no on a youth deacon. Yeah, true. But there, and Kathy did kind of allude to it. There have been, contentious votes in the history of PCUSA churches, ours included, that the vote to move out here, I didn't live here at the time, but I heard was a contentious vote. So these things do occur that we do find ourselves in, less easy votes together. Okay, I think that was the end of my slide, so I'll just keep talking about this one. Basically, what the General Assembly has said from the top down is like, we are in support of LGBTQ inclusion, but individual congregations or individual pastors have what is called freedom of conscience, which basically means like if a pastor who has been part of the denomination, for 30 years is like, well, I don't want to officiate a same-sex wedding. They have that right as an individual, but they could that own congregation could still say we support LGBTQ inclusion of members, right? Or there could be another pastor who is part of that same church who is willing to perform a same-sex marriage, and that's okay. So the overall answer is like, yes, inclusion, but people can say no depending on their individual feelings. The last kind of element to touch on, or two things, I guess, is kind of what does the pastor do at a Presbyterian church, right? Carl says, who knows? Yeah. Well, I'm going to try to be so brief. So Pastors are identified as ministers of word and sacrament. That's their two main responsibilities. So proclaiming the word, preaching on a Sunday morning, and then sacraments, which there are just two of. There's baptism and Lord's Supper. I just wanted to call it something Catholic because that's how I grew up. I was not forgetting what it was. I was just like, not Eucharist. Don't say that. Anyways, so those are the two things that those are basically the two things that pastors are responsible for on a week-to-week basis. And then pastors are the moderator of session, which basically just means they kind of facilitate the session meeting. Pastors don't have a vote on session, so
the exception being in the case of a tie.
yes, yeah, you're gonna break the tie. So yeah, so pastors, compared to some other denominations, don't have as much power or authority that decisions are made collectively. Certainly, pastors can, steer the direction of things, or they have an important role in leading a church, but they don't have a vote on session, so they help moderate. Also, pastors are called by churches, not assigned. Right? Some denominations, like if you're Lutheran or Methodist, or not Lutheran, Methodist, right? The bishop, yeah. Thanks.
Or Catholic.
Yeah, or Catholic. Yeah. Sends you your local pastor, right? So Presbyterians, it's like any other job, basically. Hopefully with more prayer, like Kathy says, but they get called to the position, interviewed, and then approved, and voted in a congregational meeting. Carl. Yeah, which is why if you look at the board game, things go back to Presbyterian and come back to us. That's that example of the triangle at work.